Hi everybody, welcome to this video tutorial on database design. Today we're going to take a look at entity relationship diagrams. In previous tutorials we've looked at how to normalize a database from unnormalized form all the way through to third normal form. This has resulted in a database with 4 different entities. Now when I say entity, I mean table. Okay, so here's the trips table. I can see that it has a composite primary key. Okay, the primary key is denoted by this underline, and there are more than one of them, so that's a composite key. And there are also 1, 2, 3 foreign keys in this table. I know that root ID is a foreign key because it has this asterisk next to it. Now, when I say foreign key, what I mean is this information here, this field, is a primary key in another table. Okay, there it is. It's a primary key in the roots table. And we're using this information in another table. So this is a foreign key field. So our database also has a buses table, which tells us about buses. Okay, so each bus is listed in this table, and we use any of those buses in our trips table. We use them many times. Bus number 57 is used 3 times here. Okay, and our route, we've got different routes which are defined in the routes table, and we can use them in the trips table. So route number 1 is used twice in the trips table. And we've got our drivers. So driver with an ID of number 1 is Jack, and he, in the trips table, drives 1, 2, 3 different trips. Okay. Now, when we're designing a database, even before we get this far to actually thinking about the attributes or the fields of a table, we really need to think about what entities will comprise our database. Okay, so one useful way of doing that is by creating an entity relationship diagram. So when we've got to the stage where we're happy with the entities which are going to make up our database, we need to ask ourselves, what is the relationship between the entities? For example, we can suggest that a bus in this table can take many trips in this table. Okay, so n just means many. So here we have a one-to-many relationship. And just to make that clear, let's go back to our table again. Do you remember? Bus number 57, which is only listed once in this table, is listed many times in the trips table. There it is, and there it is. Okay, so this is a one-to-many relationship. We could say or suggest the same thing about the route. One route can be used for many trips. And we could say the same thing about drivers. One driver can take many trips. Okay. Now this way of producing an entity relationship diagram, I usually refer to it as a standard entity relationship diagram, but I think it does have a formal name, which is the Chen form of entity relationship diagrams. Okay. Now there is another very common form of entity relationship diagram. So let's just take a look at it. Does look a little bit more confusing than the Chen form. This is known as the crow's foot form. And the reason for that is, in this form of producing an entity relationship diagram, you'll often see this symbol here. And it looks like a crow's foot. Okay. So let's see if we can just break down what these symbols mean to help us establish the relationship between 2 entities in a database design. So I'm just going to get rid of that for a moment, and let's just bring up one connection between trips and buses. Now, we've already established that a bus can take many trips. So that's really what that's telling us. A bus can take many trips. But a trip, going back in the other direction, a trip only needs one bus. So to make that clear, we can do this. Okay, so what we're now looking at is, if we're starting on this side, we look over here. And we look at what the relationship is with this thing. Okay, so a bus can take many trips, but from the trip perspective, a trip only needs one bus. That's what that's telling us. Okay. Now it could be that a trip needs at least one bus, but maybe a trip can have more than one bus. So this is a way to express that. Let me just line that up as best I can. Okay, now then, this is interesting. What this means is, look again, we start over here and we look over to what the relationship is with this entity. So a trip can have it must have a minimum of one bus, but it could have many buses. Okay, a minimum of one and a maximum of many. That's what that's telling us. Okay. Now, let's say that, let's just go back to our database design for a moment. I'm just going to go into the buses table. I'm going to say that a new bus is joining our fleet of buses. And this bus has an ID of 100. And at the moment, there's no need for this bus to be part of a trip. We're not going to use this bus. Well, it's not necessary at the moment. Okay, it's optional to have for a bus to have a trip. Notice it's not optional for a trip to have a bus. We can't do this. We can't say, okay, for the next trip, we're going to follow this route with this driver on this date. We can't do that. We can't say that this trip can happen without a bus, right? No trip can happen without a bus. We need a bus, okay? A trip needs a bus, but a bus doesn't necessarily need a trip, okay? So from an entity relationship diagram, we could do this. We could say, from a bus's perspective, a bus can have 0, which is the minimum, to many, which is the maximum number of trips. Okay, so that's what these symbols mean here. A trip must have at least one bus, but could have many. And a bus doesn't need a trip, but it could have many. Okay. And again, if we're deciding that a bus needs to have at least one trip, then we would do that. And if we decide that a trip must have one bus and only one bus, then we would do this. A minimum of one and a maximum of one, meaning a trip must have one bus. Okay. Now, if we're thinking about a relationship being optional or compulsory, let me just go back to this again. A bus can have 0 trips or many trips. It's optional. A bus doesn't need to have a trip, but a trip must have at least one bus. Okay, we're now talking about modality. And what modality means is if a relationship between entities in a database are optional or mandatory. So in this situation, the buses to trips relationship is optional. The modality is optional. But from trips to buses, a trip needs a bus, no choice. So the modality is necessary or mandatory, compulsory, that kind of thing. Okay. Now, speaking of the one-to-many or one-to-one or many-to-many relationship between entities in a database, we're now talking about cardinality. And there are three very common cardinal relationships between entities in a database: one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. So here we can see that the trips table and buses table have a one-to-many relationship. If we decided that many buses are required for a trip, there would be a many-to-many relationship. Okay? And if we decided that only one bus can ever take one trip for whatever reason, then we would say there is a one-to-one relationship between those two entities. So there's a very brief introduction to entity relationship diagrams and the idea of the crow's foot of drawing an entity relationship diagram and the concepts of cardinality and modality.